Hello, hi. I know it's been a while. I finished school and I really just took a full week off of making videos because I was studying for my finals, and then I spent the weekend at my family's place visiting some family because frankly I haven't really had a summer that has allowed me to do that. So now I have 2 weeks off. And as you just saw, I'm getting ready for fall. Fall is in the air a little bit, and it's making it really, really hard not to be super excited for it. And on top of that, this is the first time in my adult life in a really long time that I'm actually officially going back to school in September. So it truly feels like the start of the new year. So I am taking these next 2 weeks to really prepare for fall. I went back to school clothing shopping, I went thrifting, and I've got a bunch of pieces for back to school and for like a cozy fall vibe. I organized my desk yet again. I switched up the pictures to reflect more of my fall mood board, a little bit cozier of vibes. I really wanted to get rid of the big light that I have there because it's just always in the way. And as you saw at the beginning, I organized my fall TBR, which is exactly what I want to take you through today and talk about a little bit. So let's dive into it. First and foremost, the book that I am reading this fall, which isn't really like a fall themed book at all, but it is the one that I'm probably the most excited for. It is one of my favorite books of all time, and if you follow me on Instagram, you already saw the official announcement. I am rereading War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It is certainly my favorite classic of all time. It is one of those rare life-changing reads for me that completely altered the trajectory of my life in a way that I couldn't summarize briefly in this video, and maybe one day I'll talk about it. I am actually filming an entire reading vlog on this, so I will probably talk about it in that reading vlog a little bit. But also I won't talk about it too long today. And I will just say that I'm reading 22 pages a day from now until probably mid-October with my very best friend in the whole wide world. I think I talked about this book so much, and I think she saw the profound effect it had on me, and she really wanted to read it herself. And I couldn't just sit by and watch her read it. I had to experience the story alongside her, and it is so wonderful to have someone else read these pages and really just see what you see in this story. So first and foremost, this is the book that I am reading this fall. I think I'll probably end up reading more books than what I've selected, but I have a lot of winter books and I didn't quite want to put snowy books on my shelf yet. So I'm probably gonna do a winter TBR around like November season because I have so many snow and winter books that I'm so excited to read. After I am done reading Leo Tolstoy, my next major challenge this fall is going to be reading the entire works of Edgar Allan Poe. I read the entire works of Edgar Allan Poe when I was in high school. Poe, for the longest time, has been one of my favorite writers. For my wedding present, my lovely husband bought me the entire works of Edgar Allan Poe in really old, beautiful editions in like 100-year-old books. I love them. They are like my prized possessions. I really want to reread Poe as an adult, and I didn't want to read the really old copies because I didn't want to destroy them or spill coffee on them, which, you know, knowing me, I might do. So I went out and I got myself a cheap, unabridged, complete tales and poems of Edgar Allan Poe. This I just got at a used bookstore near me, and it's just all of his works in one volume. And I'm probably gonna spend my November reading this because I feel like Poe in November is like the perfect month for him, and it's also my favorite month of the year, and I feel like diving into Poe in a major way during that time period will be like chef's kiss. Another book that I always read pretty much every single fall because it is one of my favorite fall books is The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. This is also another favorite classic. It's nowhere near War and Peace for the profound impact on my life. However, this is just such a good story. It's such a good book. It's so atmospheric. It's funny. There's romance in it. There's darkness in it. Nothing beats reading about the bowels of the Paris Opera House during a rainy fall weekend. It's indescribable. I love it so much. It is one of my favorite books to visit every single fall because it just puts me in that cozy mood and it's really approachable. It's really not a difficult book to read, and the characters are delightful, and then I always end up watching a Phantom of the Opera adaptation afterwards. But I put this on because I know inevitably there's going to be a rainy weekend where it gets really dark early that I'm just going to want to cozy up and read this book, and I would be kidding myself if I didn't include it on this list. And for the record, I am definitely Team Raoul. So I am Team Raoul. I bet you that will tell you a lot more about me than I could ever say. Next up, I have a graphic novel. It's actually a collection of stories by Junju Ito. It's called Shiver. This manga is filled with a bunch of spooky stories that I feel like will be so much fun to dive into when I'm starting to feel that pull towards spooky season. Let's be serious, I always have the pull towards spooky season, but it's just more like accepted and sponsored in the fall, and I feel like that'll be a really fun book to read one day on the weekend, again during like a rainy, cold day. I feel like the theme of this fall for me is like dark academia and classics. For some reason I have a lot of both of those on my shelf. However, the next one that I'm about to talk about does not fit into that theme at all. This is A Crooked Tree by Una Mannion. I randomly picked this up at a used bookstore. I just read the back and it sounds really good. It is a thriller set in the early 1980s in a foresty town that follows a family who one night they are driving home and the mother gets so unbelievably exhausted with her children because they are fighting and pulls over and leaves the youngest daughter on the side of the road, and she is never seen again. And that is essentially where this book picks up. It is a coming of age, but also a thriller, and it's set in the woods, and I really crave nature books during the fall. I mean, I crave nature books year round, but particularly during the fall. I love reading outside, and I feel like this book will be very atmospheric and like a good little palette cleanser with all of the classics that I'm gonna read. Next up, I have Dracula by Bram Stoker. I've never read Dracula. I always opt for Frankenstein. I should probably check this one off of my list and give it a try. I'm really excited to dive into this one and see where I fall on loving or hating it. And also, I'd love to see which one I prefer, if I prefer Frankenstein or Dracula. Because in my mind, for some reason, those two are closely linked. I don't know why. Speaking of, I threw in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein because much like Phantom of the Opera, I always reread this one in the fall. I can't help it. I don't know why. I just crave this story in the fall time. It is dark. It is profound as well, and it is such a fascinating study on human nature and our relationship to science and scientific discovery, but more so our relationship to knowledge and how we as humanity wield our knowledge and what makes us human, and how our knowledge often fights our humanity and vice versa. And I just love it. I love it so much. It is such a good written book. I love Mary Shelley. The next three are shorter classics that have been on my list for a really long time. We have The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This is a story about a young governess who is hired to look after two children, and it becomes a kind of sordid gothic ghost story where you're not sure what is reality and what is real. And The Haunting of Bly Manor was inspired by this story, and I love that show, and I feel like I would really like the vibes of this book and the atmosphere of this book. I have an Anne Radcliffe, a Sicilian romance. I've always wanted to read Anne Radcliffe. I feel like she's like one of the OG Gothic writers. She is a lady writer, and I love my lady writers, particularly my historical lady writers, and I have a couple of her books on my shelf, and I felt like going with maybe the shorter one. I really want to read Romance of the Forest by her, but I can't find it anywhere, so I'm gonna go with the next best thing, which is a Sicilian romance. I also have The Mysteries of Udolpho on my shelf, but it's a little bit longer, and I have a lot of long classics that I wanna try to read. So I feel like picked a shorter one. This is set in Sicily's castles, and it's incredibly atmospheric, and from what I understand, there is a ton of Gothic elements, particularly Gothic nature writing, so here for it, super ready to dive into it. I also have The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. Walpole? I'm not sure how it's pronounced. I should look it up. I'll look it up. But The Castle of Otranto is also one of the forerunners of Gothic fiction. It actually says here it's the first supernatural English novel and one of the most influential works of Gothic fiction. So I feel like it is essential to have on my reading list for fall. I'm really, really excited to dive into this one. There's something I love, like a good castle-based story, which I guess is pretty clear with all of the books that I've just talked about. And since this is like one of the first Gothic stories, I feel like gotta read the OG. The next really, really big book that I have is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. This is a kind of fantastical, dark academic, magical society type book. This is essentially like the battle of two like wizard scholars, I think would be how I would describe it, but I haven't actually read it yet. That's just the vibe that I get from the back. So I'm really excited to dive into this. I feel like December is going to be such a cozy time of year to dive into a really long book. And I've already like blown away my reading goal this year. My reading goal was 50 books and I think I'm like 14 books over that. So I'm going to take the time in the rest of the year to like read long books and really saturate in stories that I can take my time with. And this has been on my shelf for a couple of years now, and I feel like December will be the perfect time to knock it out of the park. And looking forward to early next year, I think I'm going to read Les Miserables because I've always wanted to read that book, and I feel like reading that in the dead of winter is going to be perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to take you to the shelf because I can't actually pull any of these books off the shelf because of these two big boys that are in the way. Okay, so first and foremost, I have been starting to pull my Animal Spirit tarot cards. I'm not the biggest believer in tarot. I'm not really a believer of anything, but I really like picking a card first thing in the morning because it actually reminds me to settle in and not look at my phone and just like take a few deep breaths before I start journaling. And they're just like really pretty artwork to look at and important reminders, and I have no idea if they mean anything, but sometimes they really do like hit home and I appreciate it. So that's why that's up there. And then looking down here is my second shelf. This is the one that has some dark academia and a lot of fantasy on it. One thing that I really want to do this fall is reread the Six of Crow series. I've actually not read Crooked Kingdom because I'm really, really scared to. So I've been putting it off long enough and I'm finally going to reread it, but I'm finally going to read it, but I really want to reread Six of Crows because I absolutely loved this story. This is probably one of my favorite YA books. I think it's fantastically written. I love the characters, and I really just want to say that I've read the complete story, even though it's going to kill me. I put this one up here. This is The Star-Touched Queen by Roshni Chokshi. This has been on my TBR for a really long time, and I frankly just kind of want to like read it, see if I like it. I absolutely love Roshni Chokshi's writing. I think that she is a fantastic writer, and this is her first book, so it'll be really interesting to read that. I have a kind of lighter, floofier romance, The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. This is a story of a young woman who puts a curse on her ex-boyfriend. I've heard really mixed reviews about this one, but I got it at a used bookstore, and I'm reading so many classics that I feel like I'm gonna need a lot of like palate cleansers, as I like to call my romance and fantasy. And so this is definitely going to be a palate cleanser in between all of the gothic horror that I have. I also really want to read Belladonna by Adeline Grace. I don't know what it's about, frankly, at all. I feel like it's one of those books that has like good vibes, and I downloaded the audio book to listen to it because I feel like it'll be a good book to listen to. This one I bought last year. This is A Wolf for a Spell by Kara Sutton, and this is inspired by Russian folklore. It's a middle grade story, and it has the Baba Yaga in it, and it's set in a dense forest in, I believe, Russia, if not like a Russian-inspired world. And I love reading Russian books in the fall and winter time. There's just something so magical about that connection for me. And this has been on my list for a long time. And I feel like, once again, it'll be a good palate cleanser. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to read this one. This is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I'm so excited to read this one. I am not the biggest vampire lover. I don't love vampire books. I really struggle with them. But I just feel like there's going to be something about this story that pulls me in. This is a story that is essentially Dracula reimagined, but not quite. It's told from the perspective of one of the wives of Dracula. And from what I understand, it's got amazing themes and brilliant writing. And it's just the kind of story that sucks you in and sweeps you away. And I feel like I'm so ready for that. And it'll be really interesting to read a kind of modern Gothic story while I'm also reading a bunch of classic Gothic stories. Next up, I have If We Were Villains by L.M. Rio. This is a dark academia style book. It is a kind of murder mystery story set in a Shakespearean company. And I've heard fantastic things about this book. I've only ever heard good things about this book, so I'm really, really excited to dive into it. Apparently it's got some really amazing Shakespeare references, and it's just like a wild ride, and I think that that's going to be really great. I have The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I have never read this book. I've tried to read The Goldfinch, and I could not get through it, and I'm just like in a really big dark academic mood, as you can tell, for the fall, and I feel like I gotta give this one a try. I gotta cross it off my list, and I don't know, I have good feelings about it despite not necessarily loving The Goldfinch. We will see. It's definitely gonna be one of the books that I'm reading when I go back to school because I feel like it's set in an academic setting and it's just gonna be like the best vibes. Okay, this one is probably gonna seem like it's out of left field, but it's really not. This is The Crimson Petal and the White by Michael Faber. This is set in Victorian England and we follow a sex worker slash a prostitute. I believe she's referred to as a prostitute in the story. It's apparently just like really, really good. I'm laughing so hard because one of the things that I know about this book is like there's a reference in Gilmore Girls where Emily Gilmore explains this book to Lorelai, and it is like one of the funniest moments because like Emily Gilmore is like slightly intoxicated and she's like explaining this book and she's just like in a dressing gown. Anyway, it's a very specific Gilmore Girls reference, but this is actually one of my friend's favorite books of all, and she knows that I love historical fiction, so she's always trying to get me to read this, but she's like, it is the best book to read on like a cozy fall evening because of the fact that it's Victorian England and it's like just nasty. And so I'm really excited to dive into it. I think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be really good. I have been reading a lot more historical fiction this year, and this has been on my shelf yet again for a really long time. So 'tis the season to get through books that have been on my shelf for a really long time. This one has not been on my shelf for a really long time. My husband actually just bought this book, and I think it sounds really, really good. This is by David Mitchell. This is called Slade House. And this is kind of like a psychedelic horror book. It's a horror story that evokes The Haunting of Hill House. So it's like David Mitchell's attempt at The Haunting of Hill House, which I think will be very fascinating. I bought this book. This is The House of Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I bought this book when we were in Salem, Massachusetts this year for my best friend, who I'm reading War and Peace with. I was there for her wedding, and we didn't actually go to the house that was inspired by this story. There's like a house that you can do a tour at there, but we didn't actually go into it. We just walked around it, and I read the description of this book and it sounds phenomenal. Yet again, it's like a Gothic story that follows a family and a house, and I just think it's gonna be good vibes. Finally, on this shelf, I have The Monk by Matthew Lewis. This is like a religious horror book. Once again, it's also Gothic, and we follow a monk as he spirals into madness because he is possessed by the devil, I believe is how the story goes, and I have only heard good things about this. I've heard that it is horrifying and like grotesque and very like sexual based, and it was written a long time ago, and I feel like that intrigues me. So that's it. There you have it. Those are all the books that I hope to get to this fall. We shall see. It is a hefty list, and there are a lot of classics this time of year, and I'm not really sure how my brain is going to like that when I'm also going to school and writing and doing all of the brain things that I do, but I don't know. I just feel like if there's any time of year to dive into classics and really like embrace literature and reading, it is the fall, because it is a very cozy season. And it leads into my favorite season of all, my favorite reading season, and that is winter, and we are so close. It is important to live in the present. Yes, I know. But it is also important to have things to look forward to and things to be excited about. And all of these books I'm so excited to read, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what books are on your list this time of year. Let me know what you think about some of these books if you've read them. I'm so curious, and I will see you in the next video.